So, in patent prosecution, there are very few things more annoying, in my opinion, than when an examiner mischaracterizes your invention. Why is that? Because there's not a huge amount you can do about it, and it stops you from getting good examination. So let's start with the first point, or the second point first, rather. So second point first, and then we'll do the first thing I mentioned second. So how does it stop you from getting a good examination? Well, obviously, if the examiner mischaracterizes your invention, their search is going to be lousy. Their arguments, their rejections are going to be lousy because they're not going to be on the actual invention. So what just happens is you lose an office action. So if it's the first office action, you lose your first office action. Then you have to do some amendment, something else. And you might be under final the first time you actually get a decent search. So that's frustrating. Another problem is the deck is really stacked against you if you're the applicant and the examiner mischaracterizes your invention. And the reason for this is the broadest reasonable interpretation rule. One of my cardinal principles in patent prosecution is if I get an examiner who is mischaracterizing me and saying, oh, broadest reasonable interpretation, I try hard not to fight that. And a reason for that is that examiners can just get away with a lot under broadest reasonable. My favorite case to demonstrate this is In re Buzzard. That's 504 Fed 3rd 1364, 2007 case, but the rules are still basically the same. That was one where the invention included a flexible foam insulator, and the prior art, the insulator was not flexible, but was a rigid insulator, but it had been smashed. And the examiner was saying, well, broadest reasonable interpretation, I mean, it's not rigid anymore, therefore it's flexible, therefore I'm rejecting you. And of course, the applicant won, but you notice I used a Fed 3rd citation. That's because this went all the way to the Federal Circuit. The applicant lost at the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, and it was a split decision. There was a dissent. So if you are only as clear as the difference between flexible and rigid but smashed into tiny pieces, just bear in mind you might have to go all the way to the Federal Circuit to win your case, and even then, just one vote and it would have flipped it. So I try never to be in that situation, which means I try never to fight on interpretation. All right, so what do I do? Well, the first thing I do is I will look and I'll say, maybe the examiner's right. I mean, I am not a perfect patent attorney. Maybe I actually phrased this in a way that it seemed clear to me at the time. It isn't clear, and I didn't do a good job claiming the invention. So look at it and see, does the examiner have a point? Maybe I didn't write it right, and so I need to amend my claims. Maybe I did, but it's perhaps a little ambiguous. And the way I will usually address this is I'll write my dependent claim. So for example, I'll have claim 1 has element X, and the examiner just totally misinterprets element X. They'll say, for example, wherein element X is, I say it's a flexible insulator, and they say, okay, that just means it doesn't have the right shape, or it doesn't have a rigid shape, therefore rigid smashed into little pieces is flexible. So what I might do is I might then have a dependent claim, where I'll say, okay, claim 2, the insulator of claim 1, wherein the flexible insulator is an insulator that has it is made of contiguous molecules, something like that, right? So now, smashed into little pieces, they're all sort of separated, they're not contiguous, and I can avoid that. So, and then I'll have an interview, and I'll say, examiner, look, here is, you said this, it's not really what I had in mind. Here's what I had in mind. Do you understand that? The examiner will usually say yes when we're just talking around things because, they generally are trying to operate in good faith. And so I'll say, okay, here's an amendment that I put together that I think should help clarify this and separate it out from, what you cited. And the examiner might say, oh, that works, good job, in which case I'll probably file a response that will use that in a dependent claim. Or the examiner might say no. They say, nah, this thing, it doesn't work, you need to come up with something, and I'll try and work with the examiner to come up with good language. Usually I'll then put that good language in a dependent claim because, in general, I think my claim is good. And if the examiner ultimately says, okay, I'm going to maintain my rejection on your original claim, but not on this subsequent dependent claim, maybe I'll roll the dependent claim up. But if they don't withdraw it for anything, then, I can, if I'm going to appeal, I'll be able to appeal my main claim without adding in things that turned out to be unhelpful. But what if you really want to fight, right? You're in a situation where you think this is a ridiculous rejection and I don't need to deal with it. Well, as I said, very high bar, in my opinion. But if you want to do it, what I will do is I'll try and make sure that I'm fighting in a way that I know has worked. So one way to do this is I'll use my Arguminer patent prosecution software, and I'll say, okay, well, I want to look at arguments where the patent applicant is arguing about the broadest reasonable interpretation. So I'll put broadest reasonable as keywords in my little search box here, and apply selections. And here we go. So this one, they say it's a navigation system, and let's see what the argument was here. All right, so then you look through, you see what they said. In this case, they had a bunch of 102s. Apparently, the examiner had a weird interpretation of queries. Applicant respectfully submits Hayashida's output of guidance or route information are inconsistent with the claimed communication of queries. So they're saying, look, based on plain meaning. They go through this in great detail, citing the MPEP, citing some case law. So, we've got a lot of ammunition here if I want to make this argument. Let's just take a quick look at what ended up happening in this case. So they came back with another non-final, and the result was, okay, they got some 101s, but the arguments with respect to the rejections were fully considered and are persuasive. So it is possible. You can get over this. As I said, my general recommendation is not to fight these things. You can fight them. And as I think I've shown with this case, there are examples you can use if you want to see what succeeded. But again, it's a very high threshold. And, if you're going to try and get over it, just be aware that the deck is stacked in the examiner's favor. So that's it for right now. That's your standard examiner mischaracterize your invention. Next time, we're going to be talking about another way that you can have your invention mischaracterized and some different strategies for how to address that. So I hope to talk to you then, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.